is saved. Thanks to the Powerpuff Girls.
So, if you remember the original Powerpuff Girls, you have this. 3 super small kids who look like kindergartners with the roundest and biggest eyes possible, those stubby, fingerless hands, and the girls just flying around the very flat and cartoony world of Townsville while fighting the biggest monsters like it's no big deal. And then their origin story, as we all know, is basically 3 simple young girls. But wait, throw in some sugar, spice, and everything nice, plus some chemical X, and boom! Their origin is told in roughly 30 seconds during the intro credits. But now, take the same basic story and run it through a completely different filter. For instance, back in 2006, Japan actually made its own take on the Powerpuff Girls. This was an anime by the name Demashita, Powerpuff Girls Z. And this one is a lot to take in if you only know the American version. It still has 3 girls and the same basic superhero concept, but otherwise, it pretty much gets completely remade. Everything, including the designs, story, origin, characters' ages, tone, and even Professor Utonium's family received some serious redesigning. And we are going to talk about that. So, welcome back to our YouTube channel, where today we will be discussing the biggest differences between the American and Japanese versions of the Powerpuff Girls. From origin stories and anime transformations to how the fights, villains, and even Professor Utonium's family completely change depending on which version you watch. Art style and character design. Let's start with the most obvious thing that greets you on the screen, the animation. The Powerpuff Girls leans more towards childlike drawings and visual logic, inspired partly by the limited animation and modernist styles associated with studios such as United Productions of America. It uses thick outlines, simple geometric shapes, and flat-looking characters. More specifically, the 5-year-old girls have big eyes on tiny bodies and hands with no defined fingers. They look like something intentionally abstract. But these features became their signature look, instantly recognizable. Powerpuff Girls Z throws out most of these concepts and starts almost completely fresh. Here, the character designs are the work of Mio Shimogasa, who had previously worked on several anime productions, including Sailor Moon, Cutie Honey Flash, and Ultra Maniac. Her experience is reflected in the character designs for this show. The details are much more prominent in PPG Z, with properly defined fingers, more detailed hair, and standard anime proportions. This makes the designs look more conventionally human, while also giving them the magical girl aesthetic. However, during their daily lives, they look like ordinary school-going girls. Their Powerpuff identities are forms they transform into during missions and leave behind afterwards to blend back into the regular crowd. Chemical X versus Chemical Z origin. The premise in the original Powerpuff Girls was simple. Professor Utonium was trying to mix sugar, spice, and everything nice to create the perfect little girls when Chemical X was accidentally dumped into the mixture. The result was the birth of 3 flying, crime-fighting girls named Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. Their individual personalities loosely reflect the 3 original ingredients. Bubbles is associated with sugar, Buttercup with spice, and Blossom with everything nice. The claim that they canonically represent body, mind, and spirit is not established in the series. They also display some characteristics commonly associated with oldest, youngest, and middle child roles, although they were created at exactly the same time. In the anime, the origin is entirely rewritten. Professor Utonium and his son Ken are experimenting with Chemical X when their robot dog, Peach, accidentally drops a daifuku, a Japanese rice cake, into the vat, transforming it into a brand new substance called Chemical Z. At around the same time, weather conditions throughout the world begin going into freak mode. Ken fires Chemical Z at a gigantic iceberg approaching Tokyo City through Tokyo Bay, attempting to stop the disaster and restore the planet's weather. In the process, white and black rays of light shower the city. That is the actual catalyst that triggers everything that happens afterwards, rather than Professor Utonium simply spilling something into a beaker. The white rays hit Momoku, Miyako, Kaoru and Peach, granting them supernatural abilities. Meanwhile, black rays strike various people, animals, and objects, creating villains such as Mojo, Jojo, and Princess. They went from sisters to classmates. In the original American PPG series, Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup are sisters living under the guidance of Professor Utonium. Their entire dynamic is based heavily on their sisterhood. In the Japanese take on PPG, however, the trio do not share blood. Instead, they are 8th grade classmates, each with her own family and home life outside crime fighting. They become a superhero team after receiving their powers and learning to transform. It's a small change, but it makes a huge difference. You are no longer primarily watching family dynamics. You are watching a group of friends learning to operate as a team. This allows for more school-themed stories involving classmates, social rivalries, crushes, and teenage problems, situations that would not make as much sense with kindergartners. New personalities with a new age group. In the original trio, the personalities have pretty solid molds. Blossom is the reliable and academically gifted leader, Bubbles is the soft, sentimental, and sweet one, and Buttercup is the aggressive tomboy. PPG's Z keeps the basic framework of these archetypes, but modifies and exaggerates them for 13-year-old characters. Momoku, for example, remains the self-appointed leader, but she is not the calmest or most academically focused member. She is energetic, obsessed with sweets, prone to romantic fantasies, and fascinated by superhero and magical girl media. Miyako is gentle, fashionable, polite, and popular, while Kaoru is even more of a sports-loving tomboy than Buttercup. The personalities are recognizable enough to connect them with the originals, but they are not simply older versions of Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. The professor gets an entire family. Back in the original PPG, Professor Utonium is a single father who raises his 3 girls largely on his own without a spouse or other children living in the household. In PPG-Z, Professor Utonium has an extended family and support network. This includes his young son, Ken Kitazawa, who assists him in the laboratory and is responsible for firing Chemical Z at the approaching iceberg. There is also Peach, Ken's robot dog, who is hit by a white Z-ray, gains the ability to speak, and helps trigger the girls' transformations. The series later establishes that Ken's mother is away working aboard a space station. The emotional dynamics are therefore completely different. The girls are not Professor Utonium's daughters. Instead, they become close allies and almost older sister figures within the Professor and Ken's wider support system. Townsville becomes Tokyo City. The Townsville of the original is a deliberately stylized American city designed for cartoonish gags and giant monster attacks. The PPG-Z setting, however, is Tokyo City, which is called New Townsville in the English dub to retain brand recognition. From towering high-rises and train lines to Japanese schools, shopping districts, neighborhoods, and festival settings, the flavor is distinctly Japanese. This change goes beyond a simple visual redesign. It gives the show new storytelling opportunities through school life, Japanese holidays, festivals, community events, and other slice-of-life situations. The villains get softer, and a few become more sympathetic. The biggest overhaul is Mojo Jojo. In the original, Jojo was Professor Utonium's laboratory chimp. During the creation of the girls, he shoved the professor, accidentally causing Chemical X to spill into the mixture. The explosion exposed Jojo to Chemical X, enlarging his brain and giving him extraordinary intelligence. That shared origin links him directly to the girls from the beginning. PPG-Z erases that connection. Its mojo begins as an ordinary zoo monkey who has been mocked and mistreated by humans. A black Z-ray gives him greater intelligence and supernatural abilities, leading him to seek revenge against humanity. He therefore has no direct involvement in the girls' creation. He also changes from one of the original series' most intelligent and dangerous villains into a more immature and comedic nuisance, although he can still cause serious trouble. Princess Morbucks receives another major update. Originally, she is a spoiled rich child who uses money and technology in repeated attempts to become a Powerpuff Girl or defeat the team. In PPG Z, she becomes Himeko Shirogane, a wealthy and jealous student whose insecurities are partly connected with living in the shadow of her accomplished older sister, Miko. When the black light affects her, those feelings become exaggerated and transform her into Princess. She occasionally behaves more kindly and develops a less hostile relationship with the girls, but she does not receive a complete or permanent redemption arc. The Amoeba Boys also receive a notable change. While the original group consists of 3 male amoebas, the PPG Z version includes a female member. Fuzzy Lumpkins, Sedusa, and the Gangrene Gang remain recognizable adaptations of the American characters, but their backstories are not identical. Like many villains in PPG-Z, they are recreated or transformed through black Z-rays or black Z-ray dust. Him is one of the clearest exceptions to the general softening of the villains. In PPG-Z, he remains a major threat and becomes the series' principal antagonist. His final fate is also disturbing. His consciousness becomes trapped inside a cloud of white Z-rays and is launched into space. Overall, the idea that many PPG-Z villains receive their powers from black light, whether they were originally animals, people, or objects, blurs the line between someone who is inherently evil and someone whose worst qualities were magnified by supernatural radiation. The fights lose some of their edge. The idea here might sound contrary to the usual assumption about anime, that the anime version of the Powerpuff Girls would increase the violence, but it does almost the opposite. Back in the original Cartoon Network series, the fight scenes could be unusually intense for a children's cartoon, featuring black eyes, missing teeth, bruises, explosions, and occasional blood. This may partly reflect the concept's origins as Craig McCracken's student project, the Whoop-Ass Girls, before the name and presentation were changed for television. The PPG-Z fight scenes generally feel lighter, more airborne, more weapon-based, and more comedy-oriented. Whether that makes them weaker is subjective, but they usually have less of the original show's brutal physical impact. The anime loses some of the striking juxtaposition created by tiny kindergarten-aged girls delivering extremely violent beatdowns. That contrast was one of the things that made the original so memorable, but PPG-Z deliberately moves in another direction. Secret identities become a plot device. The Powerpuff Girls in the original never actively try to hide their identities. Everyone in Townsville knows who they are, where they live, and that Professor Utonium created them. Being Powerpuff Girls is their normal identity. On the other hand, the girls in the anime version are instructed to keep their identities hidden. Therefore, Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru have to conceal their superhero lives, sneak away from class, make excuses for sudden disappearances, and manage 2 separate identities. It is a familiar magical girl and superhero anime trope, but it gives PPG-Z a kind of storytelling the original rarely needed. Episodic tone. Comedy versus slice of life. Many original Powerpuff Girls episodes begin with the narrator introducing the city of Townsville and explaining the disaster affecting it that day. Stories frequently revolve around a monster of the week, villain of the week, or a problem affecting the girls, which is usually resolved by the end of the segment. However, it is too broad to say the original has almost no continuity. Recurring villains remember previous defeats, the rowdy rough boys return after their first appearance, character relationships evolve, and occasional episodes refer back to earlier stories. Still, most segments are designed to function independently. Powerpuff Girls Z contains 52 half-hour episodes comprising 78 story segments. Many episodes include 2 shorter stories, while others use the entire running time for a single extended adventure. This format allows the anime to move between straightforward Monster of the Week plots and slice-of-life stories involving school, family, friendship, romance, and specific villains. PPG-Z also maintains more continuing mythology surrounding the Z-Rays, him, and the origin of the villains. The Rowdy Rough Boys are introduced in episode 20 and return in several later stories, although they do not remain a central threat throughout most of the series. Character relationships also change gradually. One example is Himeko Shirogane, who begins as a jealous classmate and occasional antagonist, but sometimes behaves more like a friend to Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru. However, her development should not be treated as a complete redemption from villainy. Craig McCracken sat this one out. One of Cartoon Network's defining classics, The Powerpuff Girls, was created by Craig McCracken. PPG-Z was planned with Cartoon Network's involvement and produced in Japan by TV Tokyo, Aniplex, and Toei Animation. McCracken created the original property but was not actively involved in producing the anime. That distance gave the Japanese production team the freedom to reimagine the source material's origin story, world, character, ages, family relationships, and genre. For all intents and purposes, many fans consider it an alternate universe interpretation rather than a continuation of the American series. The comedy shifts from dark to cute. The comedic edge in the original PPG is often drawn from genuinely dark concepts. Him exemplifies this best. He is a cross-dressing, nearly all-powerful embodiment of evil whose soft, lisping voice can suddenly become terrifying. Episodes focusing on him often move closer to psychological horror than generic supervillain action. In Paranoia, he traps the girls in nightmares based on their deepest fears. In Tough Love, he releases an evil gas that causes everyone in Townsville, including Professor Utonium, to hate and attack the girls. Other episodes use even darker concepts for a children's cartoon. Knock It Off features Dick Hardley mass-producing unstable Powerpuff clones for profit. The clones eventually realize what he has done, turn against him, and destroy the factory with Dick still inside. This is the comic engine of the show. Extremely adorable character designs blended with disturbing and occasionally violent material. PPG-Z generally downplays that combination, even though Him remains a major villain. In this version, Him is an ancient demon who was sealed away generations ago. His bleak final fate leaves his consciousness trapped inside white Z-rays and launched into space. The rest of the cartoon generally chooses a lighter form of humor. For example, Mojo Jojo ends many of his Japanese sentences with mojo, creating a running verbal joke. Instead of bodies being cartoonishly beaten into the ground, you are more likely to see the girls overeating, panicking over crushes, dealing with school problems, or participating in episodes that make villains appear ridiculous or unexpectedly sympathetic. It is a definite shift in humor, from morbid concepts hidden beneath adorable visuals to gentler, slapstick-oriented magical girl hijinks. Him is perhaps the character who retains the most of the original show's threatening tone.
Master will be me!
Not so fast!
Same DNA, completely different show. From a zoomed-out perspective, the underlying connection between PPG-Z and the original can be boiled down to one central concept: 3 young girls using colorful superpowers to protect their city. The original Powerpuff Girls builds its legacy around a peculiar but fascinating mixture of childlike animation, superhero satire, sharp comedy, and unexpectedly violent action. Powerpuff Girls Z translates that idea into the vocabulary of magical girl anime, complete with middle school life, transformation sequences, individual weapons, secret identities, and continuing supernatural mythology. The show achieved a substantial production run of 52 episodes, or 78 individual story segments, alongside a 2-volume manga adaptation and a Nintendo DS game. However, it has remained comparatively obscure next to the original series and its later American revival. Neither show is inherently superior or inferior to the other. They take the same basic source material and apply it to wildly different genres and storytelling styles. And that's kind of the core difference between the two versions. America has a smart, darkly comedic, and at times outrageously violent cartoon about 3 kindergarten superheroes who emerged from a laboratory experiment gone wrong. Japan has 3 middle school classmates who transform like magical girls after being struck by chemical Z light and fight monsters throughout Tokyo City. For anyone who only knows and loves Cartoon Network's version of the Powerpuff Girls, PPG-Z may honestly feel like a completely different cartoon using familiar names and imagery. The instant you see Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru transform through Chemical Z rather than being created as children by Chemical X, the show feels like an alternate universe copy of Townsville. Of the differences between PPG-Z and the Cartoon Network original, which one surprised you the most? And which version got you hooked more? Do let me know in the comments down below. And of course, do not forget to hit the like and share icons. And for more such content, hit the subscribe button. That is all for today, folks. See you next time.